behind the glittering skyscrapers, busy streets, an image of prosperity, the United States hides an old wound that's far from healed: homelessness. The latest numbers show a shocking increase. More than 770,000 people are now living without permanent housing, a jump of nearly 18% in just 1 year. This crisis is now being called the worst in modern American history. Yes, this phenomenon is closely tied to the country's political landscape and policy decisions. During Donald Trump's administration, homelessness became a major point of criticism. He accused local governments of failure and even threatened to intervene directly with stricter federal policies. Now, with recent developments, one big question arises: which states have the highest numbers of homelessness? And why is the situation so severe there?
Homelessness in America has been steadily ticking up since 2019. Last year saw an 18% increase from the year before.
I've been in numerous shelters. It's like there's people bidding. It's like they're in prison.
The homeless have no right to turn every park and sidewalk into a place for them to squat and do drugs.
First, to understand the current crisis, we need to look at the big picture. It's important to know that homelessness in the U.S. doesn't always mean someone sleeping on the street. There are several categories. First, unsheltered homeless. Those living without any form of shelter, often sleeping on sidewalks, in makeshift tents, or inside their cars. Second, sheltered homeless. People staying in temporary housing, usually managed by social service organizations or government programs. And third, chronic homelessness. Those who have been trapped in homelessness long-term, often due to mental health issues or addiction. National data from 2024 shows that homeless families have seen the most dramatic increase, nearly 40%, while the number of homeless children has risen by more than 30%. These figures highlight just how fragile the U.S. social safety net has become, especially as rents continue to rise, wages fall behind the cost of living, and affordable housing becomes harder to find. However, the burden of the U.S. homelessness crisis is not evenly distributed. Some states carry a significantly larger share, earning the status of having the highest homeless populations. And, according to official data from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, California ranks at the top. Nothing compares to California when it comes to the number of homeless individuals. The state has recorded over 187,000 people experiencing homelessness, nearly a quarter of the national total. Major cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco are at the center of this issue, with rows of tents lining streets and bridges. So, why is homelessness so severe here? Housing costs in California are among the highest in the country. While the real estate market continues to grow rapidly, affordable housing has lagged far behind. Many low-income workers end up losing their homes, even while holding steady jobs. On top of that, the number of unsheltered homeless people in California is significantly higher than in any other state, showing just how difficult it is to access shelters or housing programs. In second place is New York, with around 158,000 homeless individuals. However, the characteristics here are slightly different from California. In New York, the majority of homeless people live in shelters, not on the streets. This is due to the city's right to shelter policy, which legally requires the government to provide shelter to anyone without a home. Even so, the issue remains complex. The recent migrant crisis has put extra pressure on New York's system. Thousands of migrant families have been placed in emergency shelters, including converted hotels. This shows that even with relatively strong regulations, New York still struggles to control its homelessness numbers. Washington State takes the third spot, with about 31,554 homeless individuals. Half of that number is concentrated in King County, which includes the Seattle metro area. Seattle has seen rent prices skyrocket alongside the tech boom. A mix of high housing costs, challenging weather, and the opioid crisis has made the city one of the epicenters of homelessness in the Pacific Northwest. Additionally, the rate of chronic homelessness in Washington is notably high. Many individuals have lived on the streets for years, unable to break the cycle due to limited rehab programs and a lack of accessible mental health services. Next is Florida, ranking fourth, with over 30,000 homeless individuals. The situation here is shaped by a different set of conditions. The warm climate makes it more common for people to live outside without shelter. Cities like Miami and Tampa are often portrayed with a stark contrast. Tourists on one side and homelessness on the other. Florida's economy relies heavily on tourism, creating a wide gap between income levels. Many seasonal workers earn too little to afford rent. Additionally, frequent hurricanes and natural disasters have left some people without homes and unable to recover. Massachusetts comes in fifth and presents a unique case. With a homeless population of around 20,000, the total is smaller compared to California or New York, but relatively high in proportion to the state's population. The crisis is centered in Boston, driven largely by two factors: limited land availability and the high cost of living. Interestingly, Massachusetts has also seen a spike in homeless families, in line with the migrant crisis that's added pressure on the shelter system. The state government has even struggled to find enough emergency space, repurposing schools and government buildings to meet demand. At the core, several major factors are driving the worsening homelessness crisis in the U.S. First, economic pressure. Rent prices have skyrocketed in many major cities, while the minimum wage isn't enough to cover the basic cost of living. Second, the housing crisis. The development of affordable housing is far below what's needed, leaving low-income communities increasingly displaced. Third, addiction and mental health. While not the only cause, many cases of chronic homelessness are closely tied to untreated drug addiction or psychological disorders. Fourth, social and cultural factors, such as discrimination against minority groups or military veterans returning without adequate support. On the other hand, tackling homelessness is no simple task. The challenges are complex, ranging from budget limitations to community resistance against building shelters in residential neighborhoods. One well-known term for this is NIMBY, short for "not in my backyard." There's also the never-ending political debate. Some even argue that homelessness has become part of a broader political culture in the U.S., intentionally left unresolved. On one side, there are calls for a human-centered, housing-first approach, while on the other, there's pressure for the government to crack down, especially on people living in public spaces in tents. So, how has the federal government responded to this situation? It's well known that during Donald Trump's presidency, homelessness became a political weapon. He accused Democrat-led cities, especially Los Angeles and San Francisco, of total failure. At one point, Trump even proposed federal intervention to clean up the streets, though the idea drew criticism for ignoring the root causes. More recently, Trump's earlier rhetoric has taken shape. On July 24, 2025, the White House issued Executive Order 14321, titled Ending Crime and Disorder on America's Streets, outlining a major shift in federal homelessness policy. This order marks a sharp departure from the two-decade federal consensus around the Housing First model, which focused on permanent housing and voluntary services. Instead, the new directive centers on behavioral health as the core of homelessness policy, introducing mandates and law enforcement mechanisms aimed at reshaping how aid is delivered and who qualifies for it. In other words, through this order, Trump has moved the federal approach from one of support and recovery to one of law enforcement and social control. The focus shifts to reducing the visibility of homelessness through criminalization rather than addressing the problem with long-term support and rehabilitation. Naturally, this direction has sparked strong debate, especially in certain states. At the local level, states have taken varied approaches. In California, the focus has been on housing first, providing permanent housing before addressing other issues. New York emphasizes its legal obligation to provide shelter. Washington prioritizes mental health rehabilitation, while Massachusetts is focused on accommodating the wave of migrant families. Florida, shaped by its political climate, leans more toward law enforcement measures in public spaces. Still, these efforts have largely fallen short. In many places, the rate of homelessness is rising faster than the solutions offered. So what should the government do? That question remains difficult to answer. What we can say, perhaps, is this. The homelessness crisis in the U.S. is a reflection of much deeper issues, from economic inequality and the housing shortage to the fragility of the social safety net. California, with its streets lined with tents. New York, with overcrowded shelters. Washington, with an opioid epidemic. Florida, vulnerable to disasters. Massachusetts, struggling with the burden of migrant families. Each shows a different face of the same problem. Of course, there is no single solution. It will take a combination of policies, affordable housing programs, mental health services, addiction rehabilitation, and real economic support for low-income families. The federal and local governments must work together, not just point fingers or use the crisis for political gain. In the end, homelessness isn't just about the loss of a home. It's about the loss of security, dignity, and hope. The real question is, can America, despite all its resources, find a way to restore that hope for the hundreds of thousands who've lost it?